Welcome to the German Tank Museum's YouTube channel. Hello! What we are presenting in the museum is mostly steel and plastics, rubber, oil and stuff like that, but to tell a story we need paper. We need a lot of paper, and to tell you stories we need to read, and for that we need to buy books. And what I personally like to do is to present you what we bought in the last weeks. So every now and then we make such small videos, now for the first time in English, in which we just tell you what we bought. The reason is, first of all, we like to keep you informed where we get our stuff. Second, maybe you read the books, maybe you want to talk with us, so please write in the comments if you know anything, if you have questions, if you have an opinion to one or multiple of these books, so please comment. And thirdly, maybe you buy some of these books because you think they sound interesting. That would make us very happy. So that's the reason we do this. And another reason being is it's not very complicated to do such videos, so it's fun. So let's get started. I deliberately leave out the books that are only available in German. So if anybody of you is sitting there and saying, oh, hey, I can't talk German, but I can read German, so tell me the German titles anyway, please put in the comments and I will type them down for you. But now I will concentrate on books that are available in English. So what we are buying every time is a mixture of topics. We buy books based on the assumption that they can provide something to some or at least one of the topics we have in the museum. So it's always a very colorful mixture of books that we get. And I just grab the books now as they are laying here and tell you what we got. So, first book, Carl van Dyck, The Soviet Invasion of Finland, 1939. Oh, let's look. So, 1939 till 1914. Carl van Dyck's book is not new. It's rather old. I think it's 1997, but it's a classic. The Soviet invasion of Finland is important to us because, first of all, tanks were used, but not in a very big scale, so that's not the point. But the Red Army learned much from this war that was important in the later course of the war on the Eastern Front, from the German view, after the Germans invaded it with Barbarossa. So many things that are shaping the combat efficiency or not efficiency of the Red Army later are decided here, or are learned here or not learned here. So that's why the Soviet invasion of Finland is important for us. Other armies as well looked at Finland, the Germans as well, and drew their lessons, and partly good lessons, partly not so good lessons. So that's important for us. Plus, we just want to know about this war. The war in Finland is largely unknown in Germany, so yes, we need to read about this because as of now, we know precious little about it. So, Carl van Dyck, Soviet Invasion of Finland. Next book, my personal favorite in this order, Iron Dawn, The Monitor, The Merrimack, and the Civil War sea battle that changed history. It's about ships, as you might have guessed till now, but armored ships. And there are many routes of the tank, and people mostly cite the knight, the cavalry, the chariots. But one of the more direct routes that most people forget are ships. Ships became more and more armored in the 19th century, and things like sloped armor were perfectly well known to the engineers that built the ships at this time. And the Monitor and the Merrimack, the river ships in the Civil War, were basically just water tanks. I mean, if you look at the picture, it's just a tank on the water. So, how did the idea come to pass? How did they think about armor? Which problems did they have? How did they solve them? That's pretty much proto-tank history. So Iron Dawn, very interesting for me personally and very, very relevant for the tank. Iron Dawn, Richard Snow. Let's be fair, let's say the author again, Richard Snow. Far more abstract, but also important. Mike Martin, Why We Fight. A book about the motivation of human beings to fight, and not the obvious reasons like food, water, warmth and stuff, but the question, why do we fight and die? For ideas, ideologies, nations, abstract things that you can't eat or drink or lie on. So this is a pretty important point. We don't have a part of the exhibition about the intrinsic motivation of the human being to fight, but we need to stay sharp regarding the research about this, because it's the underlying narration of what we do here. So we at least have to have a superficial knowledge of what's going on in this field. So once again, Mike Martin, Why We Fight. Mike Martin, Why We Fight. Well, okay, change again. Very concrete hell, actually. Concrete hell. Zzz. Urban warfare from Stalingrad to Iraq. Louis A. D. Marco. The tank is normally not envisioned in urban areas, but they have to go there anyway. So it's very important to learn about how tanks performed in urban areas and which role the technology, the tactics and everything else, the crew training and stuff like that played. So books like this with an overview from Stalingrad to Iraq, how things changed, are very important to us. We have several of them now, and we can slowly combine them to a very solid picture of how tanks performed in cities. And sometimes it's surprising, sometimes it's just saying what you already knew, but it's a very important topic for tanks. They like to be on open plains with light waves on the ground, but more often than not, they are also forced to go into urban areas. So, concrete hell. Next book, abstract again. Lawrence Friedman, one of the one of the big military historians and strategy historians. The Future of War, a History. This book is about how the next war was envisioned over the last 150 years. So what are the structures of thinking about future warfare? Which lessons did people draw from this thinking? And how true was it when the war came to pass? So very interesting for us, because the tank is always the spearhead of evolution, and talking about the tank to politicians, to the press, just saying why you're important is always, like with every point of the army, but with this modern machines more importantly, so is about justifying why you are important, how the next war will be fought in your way, why your armor, your tank is important. So a big study about how thinking about the next war was going on over 150 years is very interesting for us. Future of War, a History, Lawrence Friedman. So once again, The Evolution of Modern Land Warfare by Chris Bellamy. So, very interesting book and very old book. Subtitle is Theory and Practice, and the book is from 1990. So why buy such an old book? Because it held true. The book was published in 1990, so it was written 1987 to 1989, and pretty much every prediction in this book came true. So the historical overview it gives and the lessons it said have to be learned from that seem very solid. Plus, it's a new edition with an updated 2016 chapter, 2016. So the thing is quite polished, and as I said, since all the conclusions were true, it seems to be a pretty good book. Evolution of Modern Land Warfare, Christopher Bellamy. David Glantz and Jonathan House are two of the most prominent and best historians for the Eastern Front. They write book after book about the Soviet army and the clash of the German and the Soviet army. They write big books, long books, very detailed. They are more like resources for work than really readable books. And their masterpiece, speaking of pages and volume, is Stalingrad. It's I think there are now 3 or 4 books, each one this thick, and that's far too much detail for us. But thankfully, because I guess they realized nobody has the time to read such an immense work, they released Stalingrad, just Stalingrad, no subtitle. And that's just the essence of their research about Stalingrad. And as I said, urban combat, or urban area combat, for tanks is very interesting for us. So we hope that in this book there are many aspects or many stories about how the tanks performed in Stalingrad, because they were used, and it's very important to us to learn how they were used, how efficient they were, and nearly the most important, how the contemporaries thought about what the tanks could do or couldn't do. So Stalingrad by Glantz and House, new book, very interesting. Also very interesting, Lane Neville, Technicals. Technicals is the word for the pickups, and all variations of pickups, sometimes homemade armored pickups with guns and cannons on it. The subtitle is Non-Standard Tactical Vehicles from the Great Toyota War to Modern Special Forces. So, technicals are often mocked. They are objects of humor, and they're easy to laugh about. That's for sure. But if you're the aim of them, if you don't have cover or the weapon, and if you're in the crosshair of such a pickup, then they tend to stop to be funny. The thing is, these technicals are a main force on the modern warfare or modern battlefields in many regions of the world, and so they deserve to be treated like other tanks or armored fighting vehicles, and this book does so. It's a typical Osprey book, like about the M60 or the T62, just about technicals, and I like this approach because they are relevant today, and for us as a museum for, let's say, in an abstract way, motorized gun carriers in a broader sense, this is very relevant. So looking forward to read this. Before you can use tanks or whatever material, you have to build it. Accounting for War by Mark Harrison, Soviet Production, Employment and the Defense Burden, 1940 to 1945. Published in, I think it's a little bit older, published in 1996, but still relevant from what I read. It's just a big book about how the Soviets basically produced the material, under which circumstances, how they paid for it. Most important for us is how they produce tanks, of course, because the tank factories of the Soviets are most interesting. Basic layout like the American factories, but how they were worked, how they were used was completely different, with basically no regard for human life, safety and security, but with a high efficiency. So I'm looking forward to read this book, and I hope to find some new numbers as well, because there are many tables and numbers in this. Mark Harrison, Accounting for War. Also Mark Harrison, but just as the editor, the next book, same line, The Economics of World War II, 6 Great Powers in International Comparison. So he, of course, wrote the chapter about the Soviet Union, and then we've got chapters about the war economics and production of the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union, as I said. So once again, production, economy of tanks is very interesting, very important for our museum. We hope to find new stuff in there. I think it's a bit younger than the other book. Let's see, it's from, no, mistaken, 1998, paperback 2000, slightly younger. Okay, now once again, very, very tankish. Francis Pulham, Fallen Giants, the combat debut of the T-35A tank. The T-35 is a fascinating machine. It's basically the last giant of the late First World War and interwar period aesthetics, the steam war tanks with multiple turrets and big long hull and big tracks and many soldiers in it. And this tank was actually in use but quickly dropped out of production, obviously because it was outdated the minute that the war started. But it is very interesting. So since we try to grab every aspect of tank development history, even if we don't have the tank in our exhibition, we of course bought this very interesting book. Francis Pulham, Fallen Giants. Adam Maker's Spearhead. This book might be on the shelves of some of you already. It's a bestseller. It's about the tank duel in front of the Dome of Cologne in the end of the Second World War. And Adam Makers not only researched the tank duel, he actually found one member of the crew of the German and one member of the crew of the American tank and interviewed them and actually got them to meet again. And so this book is about 2 biographies, how they intertwined and how they ended up in Cologne, and then how their lives got on and how they met again. And since we try to get the human factor, the biography, the emotions, the lives of humans more into the exhibition of the Tank Museum, because the people in the tanks are the most important part of the tank, this is the perfect book for us. I'm looking forward to it because I heard it's very well written and very readable, and that's okay too. It doesn't have to be very dry and scientific all the time, as long as its source bases are good. So, Adam Maker's Spearhead. Next book, Charles J. Este, The Spanish Civil War, a Military History. There are many books about the Spanish Civil War, but until shortly, we were lacking a good, scientific, hardcore military history of the Spanish Civil War. So, Este's book aims to provide just that, a source-based book about the tactical, operational and strategic aspects of the Spanish Civil War. This is important for us because the tank use in the Spanish Civil War was very important for the armies of most European countries. They all drew lessons from what happened there, and they drew sometimes widely different conclusions. But all their conclusions were important for the conduct of the Second World War. So we have to look at the Spanish Civil War and the lessons they drew from it to understand why they fought the Second World War the way they did, at least at the beginning. So it was very important for us to get an actual military history of the Spanish Civil War, and we got it. The book is pretty new, I think 2018, even 2019, so it's really fresh. Really looking forward to it, and let's see what's in there about tanks. One of the veterans of tank books, Steven Zaloga, Smashing Hitler's Panzers, the defeat of the Hitler Youth Panzer Division in the Battle of the Bulge. Also from, I think, 2019. Steven Zaloga is one of the foremost tank historians, writing book after book. Most of you might know him from the Osprey books, the small white ones I just presented to you. But he also, as you can see, writes big monographies with a few pictures and much text. Some tables, yep, some graphs, and the history or the story of the Hitler Youth Panzer Division is very interesting. It's a very interesting unit fighting on the Western Front in the late Second World War, and I'm looking forward to read what he has to say about it, because Steven Zaloga is able to write a history of a unit or formation so that you like to read it. That's a very important point. Most scientific books with an operational focus are quite dry, and Steven Zaloga is very readable oftentimes, while staying true to the sources mostly, as far as I know. So looking forward to read him. Peter Harmsen, War in the Far East, Volume 1, Storm Clouds over the Pacific. Here in Germany we know nearly nothing about the Pacific War, and that's really sad. The Second World War is so global and so different that most people lack knowledge of some theaters, but the Pacific theater is so important that we know, next to nothing about it. But then again, the Japanese used tanks there, so it's important for us. It's important for us because they also based their tank warfare on German models. They got German tanks in the 30s, so there's a direct connection. And even if there weren't no direct connection, we have to know about this. So Peter Harmsen just publishes right now, in this moment, a trilogy about the War in the Far East. This is the Volume 1, already published. The second volume comes out in, I think, November, and the third volume will be out, I guess, to 2020. So we have this book as our new basis to learn about the war in the Pacific and hopefully learn something about how tanks were used there. Peter Harmsen, Storm Clouds over the Pacific. There's no question why we bought this book. Soviet T-54 main battle tank by Kinnear and Sebel. That's just your basic book about one tank. Much information about technology and techniques. I haven't read it yet, but it seems that there's a quite a bit context, historical context. There are pages with text on it, so I'm looking forward to that. T-54, one of the most important tanks of all time and used in the Eastern German Army, so important for us, organizational as well. Yeah, you can't have enough books about tank models, so looking forward. Kinea and several Soviet T-54 main battle tank. And last but not least, come here, Boris Kavalerchik, the tanks of Operation Barbarossa, Soviet versus German armor on the Eastern Front. Praised by many. Never read anything by Kavalerchik yet, but I'm looking forward. I heard good things about this book. Just a big overview about how German and Soviet armor clashed on the Eastern Front. From what I hear, there are some new insights in this. I hope it's not just the old run-of-the-mill Eastern Front narrative, but looking forward. So this was the last book. As I said, we haven't read any of them. We just bought them, so I can't tell you if they're good or not. If you have read them, if you know the authors, if you know a book or many of them, please comment, tell us about it. If you have questions, if you have additions, if we missed something, if we told something wrong, please comment, talk to us. We look forward to get to know you better, our new English friends, since we are just started making English videos. Talk to us, please. And if you like what we're doing, please share, comment, tell the people to like our YouTube channel. Yeah, that's basically it. Next video will be about, I guess, a new tank. So it will take some days, but after the paper, there will be again steel on this channel. Thank you very much.